America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone.
Hello, and welcome to the first inaugural podcast from Job Creators Network of Main Street Matters. Elaine, I don't know about you, but I am pretty excited. I can't even believe we're actually here. I was actually on Hugh Hewitt earlier this morning talking about it, and he said, "Where were you? You guys are like 3 years too late for this." But he's right. We were too late because, well, you know what? Small business needed this megaphone years and years ago, and we're just thankful that Salem has provided us the opportunity to be able to talk to folks out there about the importance of small business. With 33 million small businesses out there employing 60 plus million people, small business is too big to fail. And we're just excited again that we're able to do this. What about you, Elaine?
I was so excited when Salem came to us and asked us if we wanted to talk about small business on this platform. We do it every day with Job Creators Network as the nation's voice for small business and advocating for lower taxes and better and pro-growth policies and really being their voice out there. But to have the opportunity to have such a long format and the working with Salem and getting in front of millions of people every week and helping them to understand that small businesses are the backbone of this economy. And without them, we wouldn't have the economy we have. I mean, they're our friends, they're our family members, they're our neighbors. I know there's kind of three questions we always ask. It's like, how many, whenever we're talking before audience, it's like, how many people are small business owners? And hands go up. How many people know someone who owns a small business? And more hands go up. How many people shop at a small business? And by the time we're done in every audience, all the hands are up because small businesses impact our communities so much. And so the opportunity here, I think, is great. And then we're going to have amazing guests on from small business owners sharing their stories.
Why don't you talk to some of those, actually, about some of the ones that we're going to be bringing on.
So later this week, we'll have Joseph Sempervivo on, and he is a small business owner, actually lives in South Florida, and he'll be talking about his company that he started. It's called Joseph's Light Cookies. And this is the interesting thing about entrepreneurs. He's a type 1 diabetic. And so growing up, he couldn't have cookies and ice cream and candy and all the snacks that little kids have, but he always wanted to. So because of his challenge in life, he came up with the first sugar-free cookie. And then he developed a whole line of products from peanut butter to syrups to, all kinds of ice cream and things like that, so that diabetics like himself could enjoy the same types of snacks that other people do without having to worry so much about the sugar intake. His plant is out in New Mexico, but he has a very automated program out there, and he bakes 12 million cookies a day now. Like, that's amazing.
He's a great guy. I think we're going to love hearing from him. And what about Dina Rubio? I know that's another one that's going to be coming up on our guest list. Do you want to talk about Dina and her great story about fleeing Nicaragua?
Yeah, Dina came to the United States with her family when she was about 12. They were fleeing Nicaragua. The Sandistas had come in and taken over, and things weren't good there. And her parents knew that there was a better way. And so they came to America, and her parents worked very hard, night and day. And her sister both went to college as a result. And she ended up starting a restaurant down in West Palm Beach called Don Ramon's. Her and her husband, who's actually came here from Cuba. So
we still have to go down there. We still have to go down there and try that out. By the way, Elaine, because every time I hear her talk about it, my mouth starts watering.
Yeah, I've heard really good reviews about it. We will make it down there. We should actually broadcast the show from her restaurant.
Yeah, she actually testified before House subcommittee, I think, on inflation, and I don't think they were very keen on her testimony because she slammed Biden and the administration for the absolutely sky-high inflation that's hitting her restaurant and basically every single cost component of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, she just understands that for her, it's not a partisan issue. It's understanding that allowing her to keep more of her revenue and not pay as much to the government allows her to invest in her company and hire more employees and expand the business, and that's everything that she has worked for, and allows her to pay her employees more money. And if she's got to pay more money to the government, those are all the things she can't do. And so that's really the message that she tries to get across to people. It's not so she can build some mansion in West Palm Beach. It's so that she can, run her business successfully and therefore help her family of employees, really.
And I know that's something that inflation, like I said, has really been top of mind for all of our small business owners. At Job Creators Network, we actually have something that's called the Small Business Intelligent Quotient, the SBIQ. It's a monthly poll. Elaine, I know that through the foundation, we do this every month, like I said, and it really has had some great insight that we've been able to provide to the public and to some of our congressional leaders. Do you want to just talk about that? Because I know that every month when that poll comes out, we'll be definitely addressing that when it does.
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing is we have the SBIQ, which is really just a measurement of small business optimism. And we watch that every month, as far as whether it's, ticking up or ticking down. It's based on current situation of questions about the current situation of how small business owners are feeling, how they're feeling about the economy overall, and how they're feeling about the future of their business. And so we take that and we kind of come up with a measurement of their optimism, and we look at that every month. But then the poll also gives us some flexibility to weigh in on issues that are currently in the news or policies that are being considered, so that we can understand how they feel about whether it's the debt ceiling or the student loan bailout that the administration was trying to push through and has been blocked by the administration thanks to our efforts at the Job Creators Network. And other issues like that, and get a measurement of how they're feeling. And then every month we spend about a half an hour to an hour with the House and small business committees in briefing them on how small businesses are actually feeling about those issues, and providing that information so that they understand right from the front lines what's happening.
Yeah, it's a great poll, and like I said, I've seen it mentioned many times now, and I'm just really thankful to Scott Rasmussen and John McLaughlin, who jointly have agreed to do that poll for us. The insights on that are really tremendous, and we're excited to bring that to people on a monthly basis and through this podcast. Elaine, so before we bring in our first guest on this inaugural poll, I think our listeners would probably want to hear something about us, right? And so why don't you talk a little bit about your background, and then I'll pop into mine, and make sure you mention in particular your small business experience.
Absolutely. So I started out my career in corporate America in big business, and I worked for Chrysler Corporation. I always joke that I say that I was there for the marriage to Daimler-Benz, but I was also there for the divorce. But it was an interesting learning experience. I worked in public relations, and I focused on their product liability. I developed all of their communications plans for trials, and I was on the ground spokesperson, worked directly with our outside legal teams in working with the media. So it was an interesting position, but it led me to a man named Bernie Marcus, and long story short, it led me to Bernie Marcus, who's the co-founder of the Home Depot. And I made the decision to move out of corporate America and work for Bernie. and focus on free enterprise issues. And along the way, my family was running a business, was running actually a Goodyear tire store. It was a fairly large tire store. We had about 10 bays. About 10 to 12 employees at any given time. And just
by the way, there's a really, really great online tire company. It's called TireRack.com.
I wonder where you heard of that.
I just want to let you know that. Yeah.
Now it's time for our interview with Brad Anderson. Brad retired from Best Buy in 2009 after 36 years with the company. He started as a salesperson for Sound of Music, a small chain of stereo stores that was the precursor to Best Buy. And he worked his way all the way up to CEO in 2002. And we are lucky to say that he is the executive board chair for Job Creators Network. Brad, welcome to our first episode of Main Street Matters. We appreciate all the support.
Thank you.
Hey, so Brad, you and I have had the opportunity, and again, thank you, by the way, for being on this podcast. You and I have had some wonderful conversations about your background. Before we even get into any of the business stuff, I'd love to hear like one or two of your best stories. I mean, because you have so many, but the challenges that you faced pretty much starting from almost the ground up, to all the way to CEO of Best Buy. Tell me at least one of your funniest and like most memorable stories of your career.
One of the funniest?
Or most memorable, whichever one.
Okay. Well, I actually regard much of life as hilarious. So I guess first of all, that I'm here at all in any kind of context. I mean, I'm an old child of the '60s. Hated business as a construct. Never had any intention to be in business. Only stumbled into business. Got an opportunity out of a lifetime because I was in the right place at the right time. Not that I planned to do it. But I had the good fortune of being in a company that was massively failing. I'll just share one quick story about this because it was like, so I'm basically, I was in the '70s. I was running a 3-person little store called in a company called Sound of Music, as Elaine said, and was basically we sold audio equipment to hobbyists, and I was doing it just because I loved the audio equipment, not because I loved the business or selling. And the company was basically, it had been founded in '66, and by 1979, it was basically bankrupt. But the founder came out. I was managing one of the stores. He came out. I thought he was going to fire me. And instead of firing me, he wanted to talk to me about people he knew who could turn around the company. And he was talking to 2 people that had worked for me. Well, I only had 3 people in the store. So I got angry with him and said he should hire me. Not thinking he would, So,
right.
And then all of a sudden now I'm actually in a position where I'm hired to help turn around a company. And I don't know, I don't have a business degree. I have never run anything bigger than this tiny little store in an old 7-Eleven site. There's no rational reason anybody would let me give it the shot to do that. And then I get to know the guy that founded the company, a guy named Dick Schultz. And we're at that point in time, we're selling like $4 million stuff out of 11 stores. We're losing $200,000 a year. We literally have no cash. And I sit down with this guy and he tells me that we're building a $50 million company and that when he gets to be old, he's going to retire and give all of his money away. And I think I'm with a certifiably insane guy. And it's like, but I had nothing to lose, right? So here's this. And I love Don Quixote. So this is a guy who's got a story in his head that he wants to tell. There's no evidence that it's actually happening in reality, but he's got this story, and it's kind of a great story, and maybe we could do it. And that eventually is what turns into Best Buy. It's a long story to get there. But with thousands of mistakes, but it was like, and I couldn't believe anything about it. I couldn't believe that it was possible to do. I couldn't believe that I got the shot to do it. I couldn't believe the lessons I learned in terms of doing it. But it was just like somehow I stumbled into a situation through no fault of my own, where I was lucky enough to get to connect to a story like this.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. And when you did that, you said you know, you had a lot of lessons learned. In particular, which lesson do you think really is probably most applicable to a lot of our small business listeners?
Well, the first lesson is that you got to have basically the two most important allies. This sounds so self-evident, but actually doing it's not so easy. First of all, you
Yeah,
have to be better than somebody else at meeting the needs of a customer, which means you need to understand a customer, and then you have to outperform other people trying to serve, in most cases, that customer um, already. Which means the second thing happens, which is now you're totally dependent on what kind of talent you can inspire, and who can you
right.
attract around you? What kind of talent do they bring to the game? And can you unleash more of that talent that somebody else does with their talent trying to serve the consumer?
Yeah,
So it's a simple thing in the abstract to do. It's kind of like Elon Musk talks about how it's easy to figure out how
yeah,
to build an electric car or
right.
how to design an electric car. It's incredibly hard to build one. And so
Yeah,
the journey now in terms of how do I find talented people who want to tell the same story? How do I make sure they're connected to the consumer? And how do we inspire them every day to do more than somebody else does? And
yeah,
that's that's the centerpiece of business. But it's so counterintuitive and so counter to what most people sort of think it is, and so much harder that
right.
I think most people don't understand it. But much more than in a big business, people in a small business understand it because they go out of business if they don't.
Oh yeah, yeah. Finding that point of differentiation is so critical when you're a small business. I mean, not that it's a small business, but I had the opportunity to speak with Dan Cathy, who is one of the Cathy's founders of Chick-fil-A. And it was funny. He told me, he was talking to some folks, and they said, "Please tell us what the secret of your lemonade is, because I guess it's just outsells anybody else's lemonade." And he goes, "Oh yeah, I will tell you what our secret is. It's sugar, lemon, and water." He goes, "It's how we serve it that makes the difference."
He's right. You know,
Because obviously, you always get, go Chick-fil-A every single time you're there. He goes, my pleasure, right? I mean, it's how they deliver to the customer that I think really differentiates Chick-fil-A. It's not the actual lemonade. It's really the delivery of the service. And so that's how they
well,
differentiate themselves.
and
And so,
connected to that in a way they know more than almost any other company I can think of, and have kept knowing through a long period of time, is how inspired is that human being? Yeah, and think about
yeah,
trying to do that in the fast food industry.
right,
Essentially, we're trying to
right,
do it with best. Is you look through the lie that sits there for most people. Well, those are just counter
yeah,
people that the people don't matter because they're just people you can get anywhere off the street and have them come in and create a sandwich shop.
yeah, right.
Not
It's
if you
just,
do it at that
yeah,
level, right? And if you do it at
that's
that
right.
level, it means every individual you've touched has to be sharing in the story.
Yeah.
If you're gonna deliver a clearly superior product, that is, I love that in terms of it's lemonade, a lemon and sugar and water.
Yeah, I mean it's great, and I think Chick-fil-A understands that. I think versus any other competitor, for example, in their fast food industry, is the people. It's all really about the people. It's probably one of the reasons why they have the lowest turnover in the industry, for example, is because they actually really believe in training and educating and nurturing their people. And I will tell you that you mentioned people also as one of your one of your key learnings, finding talent. Having run this organization now for 10 years myself, and just two small businesses myself, talent is key, especially when you're a small business, right? Every single member of your team has to be passionate about what they're doing, believe in what they're doing, and really deliver above and beyond versus any other large business.
Yeah, talent in the direction of telling a story.
Yep.
When
Yeah,
what you
exactly.
guys are doing, when I got involved with Job Creators Network, which is kind of at the beginning, it's kind of like the story I told you with Best Buy. It's
Right.
Bernie Marcus decides that he doesn't want to see his grandchildren not having the opportunity he had in life,
Right.
and looks for other people that want to get involved in telling that story. And it is not a linear story, as you guys know. because it ran into a whole bunch of rocks over the course of the year. And an incredibly
Oh yeah.
almost irrational thing to try to do. How can
Right.
one guy and a group of people take on a problem that's this big? But those are the fun stories to tell.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And we have some good stories. Elaine, go. I've taken up all the time here. I'm sorry. What about you have a few questions, I think, for Brad.
Brad, I think Best Buy is kind of the great example of every big business starts out as a small business, but and it's not linear, obviously, as you had mentioned. But how do you how would you describe government in those early days, as far as, were they a partner to you while you were growing, this massive company, which wasn't massive to begin with, but you had a lot of challenges. So were they a partner? Were they a barrier? How was that relationship?
This may need to get edited out, but in my experience with it, I always thought, I was a history buff, so I always thought that, as I knew all the stories about how the mob came into small businesses and corrupted it, so I was always worried about running into the mafia. I ran into something much worse than the mafia, which is a bad person in government.
Elected mafia.
Well, yeah, it is. It was elected. It was a person because it had no boundary of power and there was no avenue of appeal to go to. So, I mean, in most cases, most of the governments we ran into were good. But if you ran into a bad one, I mean, there was nothing you could do. It was. So I think government plays. It's not that I don't think government plays a tremendously important role. If you don't have a environment that where corruption is controlled, and you don't have an environment that has that where freedom has to be managed for it to be there. It's not like we don't need boundaries, but we also got to be cognizant that the people who manage those boundaries can also be corrupt, and when they are, they're likely to be putting their hand on the side of the powerful, not the hands on the side of the people with no power.
I mean, what do you think government can do to make it easier for small businesses, following in your footsteps? I mean, every small business wants to be a big business. They want to grow, just naturally. That's what they're trying to do. So what can government do to help that along instead of being such a barrier?
Well, it's the reason virtually everything that's created in the world is created in the United States. Is our government does it better than other governments do it. And it does it better because it basically leaves room for people like me to come in and do what I had no right to do. I mean, we beat a whole bunch of companies who are much bigger and more powerful than we were to get there. And it's actually harder than to actually sustain that than it is to do that. So, I mean, the government we lived in, going back to the premises of the founding fathers, which is, if the government doesn't need to be there, it shouldn't be there. And it should allow freedom for the individual to use the agency of the individual to act. And where that has happened, which happens more here in this country than any other country in the world, you see things the customer benefits because you get choices. And corruption is we improved practices in our industry and brought down costs for the customer, not because we were saints, but because that we wanted the customer as an ally. If that structure is allowed and helped to sustain, it's great. But government also has to get out of the way in most cases. I mean, if you looked at like the great entrepreneurs, what I was lucky enough to meet, the Steve Jobs, et cetera, they succeeded. They actually, for most of their lives, they weren't even aware there was a government. If you talk to them about it, they only became aware when they became successful enough that all of a sudden they had to spend their time dealing with governments. But otherwise, it's so hard to figure out how to deliver a better product to the customer that if they could keep their attention on that, that means the government is doing a hell of a good job. If people can do that and have the freedom to do that, that's a good government. And our government anticipates the differences between the environment from state to state. All of those kinds of things are anticipated. So people compete to try to provide a good setting for people to be able to deliver a superior value proposition to customers.
Brad, it's interesting when I hear you talk about that. I think about the public versus private sectors, and I think in the public sectors where the government intervenes the most are the two areas that are probably the worst off and we're hurting the most, which is in healthcare and education. I know you've been involved somewhat in both of those areas. What's your perspective of what we need to do, either for both or one of them?
Well, both of them are really if you want to, I was involved with an effort to innovate in healthcare, and it was an innovation at a much lower cost of delivery of service than a conventional delivery. But the organization it was connected to couldn't do the innovation at the lower cost because they were billing the government 3.5 times for the same service that they were doing, not because they were making money on it. It's actually a not-for-profit, but because they were also doing all sorts of other things that were mandated by legislation that made the sort of simple solution impossible to deliver, because then it would reveal that the cost was much lower than the actual cost of delivering the service. It's when my wife's father died, we got a bill for the use of one day's deodorant, which I think was like $300 or something like that. So, absolutely absurd number. And my wife is mad. Wow. It's really like a contribution of $300 to pay for all the other stuff that they can't bill. That they're billing to us because we can afford to do it. But it means that there's no pressure to make things more efficient. Right. And to adapt and innovate, because there's pressure to make it less efficient. And people don't understand how innovation actually occurs. You have to have the freedom to be able to work with the customer to deliver a better product, which will destabilize somebody else's value proposition. That's the tension there. That it'll, if you win, it'll make it harder for somebody else who's not doing as good a job. Right, and that's what we count on as a society.
Right. So really letting the free enterprise system do what it does best, which is identify winners and losers by itself and try to find the most efficient route to deliver the product.
Yeah, and it's very, very hard when you're in spaces like healthcare where you want to find a way to deliver the care to everybody, whether they can afford it or not. Which is really the buffer that goes there. Is that you're billing somebody who can afford it to help pay for somebody who can't. So I respect how it gets to be where it is, or why those particular areas are the way they are. But they definitely are not going to be structurally efficient, and you're going to start to see, like we see, and 20+% of our GDP goes to healthcare because it's so inefficient.
Yeah.
But Brad, why are people so in Washington, you got the Democrats who want to move towards just government-run healthcare, and you need only look at other countries to see how that fails for the people trying to use the system. And the American people don't understand it. I mean, it's so complicated. They want to pay a monthly premium that's affordable. They want to go to the doctor and get the treatment that they need when they need it. That's what they want. They don't want some complex web of, copays and not understanding how to get there. But how do we move the country in that direction instead of towards government-run healthcare?
Yeah, but we're also human beings, which means we'd like somebody else to pay for it. So it's the argument the reason the United States stays. When I went to college in 1970, the U.S. had 24% of the world's GDP. And we were studying what was going to be like when it was under 10, because that was obviously coming with the growth of the rest of the world. I'm now 74, and we have 24% of the world's GDP in a much bigger world economy, because it's so counterintuitive to give people the freedom to deliver it versus going to somebody who's in office and say, you get me that service. When in truth, no matter how good they were as managers, anybody who's run a big company knows this, the bigger the company is, the harder it is to do the simple.
Right.
And by the time you make it to 340 million people delivering them healthcare, look at your senators and representatives. I mean, if you're not getting the service, you want to go talk to them about it? I mean, if you disempower the individual, you actually crush the quality of the delivery of the service. but the desire to do it is so naturally human that
Yeah.
it's the reason we need you guys in Washington all the time.
Yeah, no,
That's-
absolutely.
and you're always fighting a counter to maintain what the founding fathers had is always a counterintuitive move.
Yeah, absolutely. Elaine, I know that through your leadership under the foundation, you guys rolled out a Healthcare for You product, which was basically the answer to the Medicare for All product that Bernie Sanders was putting out there. I think what we should do is, because I know we're going to be bringing on Dr. Tom Price, who is the former HHS secretary under the Trump administration. We should make sure to have a thorough discussion about your Healthcare for You study when we do that podcast.
Yeah, I mean, the program, I actually think the program was very simple. And when I talked to small business owners about it, they did too. And that's the important part, is that people understood the simplicity of putting patients in charge and their doctors, and not having bureaucrats make the decisions for them. And it was about injecting the free market into the system, which we don't have right now. I mean, we may not have full government run, but we don't have a free market system. We don't have price transparency. We don't have competition. And I'll just use a couple of examples to show where in healthcare we do. And one of them is orthodontia. Speaking from experience, putting two girls through braces, I called around and got different estimates and took them to different orthodontists. They offer different services. Some things are included, some aren't, but the price differences were incredibly different. And even though some people have dental insurance, I always say dental insurance is kind of a fallacy past your cleaning, because as soon as you need a cavity filled, or God forbid a crown or something complex, it's really expensive. Call around. You will find very different pricing there too. And lastly, LASIK surgery is another great example. That price has come down more than 50% since the procedure was developed. And the technology's only gotten better. And why? Because there's competition in that industry, and that's important. And people do call around when it's coming out of their own pocket. They don't want to pay for it. You're right, Brad. But if they are paying for it and it's their money, they're willing to look at different prices and call around and create and see what the competition is charging.
Although I'm pretty wary of 2-for-1 specials when it comes to LASIK.
Yeah, you don't want a Groupon with your LASIK, obviously.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the other thing on that subject is the very devices we're using to do this those kinds of devices that are here. When I went for my physical, I took there was a test that they put us in, which is basically take the blood and find out if I have cancer anywhere in the body from just taking. The theory of this test, if it continues to work out, is they'll be able to tell if I have cancer anywhere in my body from simply a blood test. So, I mean, there are so many things happening from a technology standpoint that should enable massively better healthcare at a fraction of the cost in many areas. That that if we can get this structurally right, it's going to be a great benefit for the consumer.
Well, I think if we focus, and this has sort of been our strategy, if we focus on bringing the small business community aboard with more free market healthcare policy, you start to move such a large portion of the population in there, and so the hope is that you pull so many people into a free market system, like Healthcare for You or something similar. There's 30 million small business owners, or 33 million small business owners, and they employ about 60 million people. And so if you just pull that group over, you're talking about 90 million people moving towards free market healthcare instead of moving towards government healthcare. And then you really start to make progress in educating Americans, and it's really based on putting Americans back in control.
Yeah, and you can use that leverage for the quality of service and the convenience of the service, in addition to cost.
Yeah, that's right. Now, Brad, changing gears on you a little bit here. You have been with Job Creators Network since the beginning. And you mentioned a little bit earlier that this world, or this country at least, needs organizations like Job Creators Network. Tell us from the beginning, since you were here, what your vision was then and what your vision is for this organization now as our executive chair.
Well, I signed on to Bernie's vision because I shared this. I had the same experience that Bernie had, right? It was like, and by the way, but much of what, like, I've invested in startup companies, and the odds are always against you, and it's not necessarily terrible to lose. And we've done a lot of losing in Job Creators Network before the success that we're currently enjoying.
Right.
Because so it's also exciting to take on a big challenge and not make it. As a matter of fact, most of the investment that's done in venture financing, people are looking for people who've already failed a couple of times before they want to put the money into for the third time, because you learn those lessons in that process of sometimes failing.
Yeah. Although the failure part was previous management, I just have to say that.
That's true. But you guys, one of the things you guys do is you take on ridiculously ambitious and dangerous things with very little resources.
I mean, I'm just tired. I'm just tired of winning. I don't know.
Yeah, it's so boring.
Well, winning. I'm not saying winning's not fun, but in this case, it's like it's so. I mean, I didn't know that the opportunity that existed for my life that I experienced. And I think most people don't. And helping people understand what the role of a job creator is in terms of for the rest of us, and also the opportunity to be one, is so exciting. And it's very easy to kill, because we're not talking about a whole bunch of countries where you can do what you can do in America.
Right.
So
exactly.
It's why our forefathers all are here. So I mean, so I think there's a moral responsibility to try to retain it and save it. That's a pretty exciting thing to be involved with, and that's why it's one of the things that I'm still involved with, even at this elderly age. In the 90s, there was a movement called the strength-based movement, which essentially said, look, each of us. I stumbled into something I was good at. And the way where you can tell if you're good at it is, are you energized by what you're doing, or you do lose energy doing it? But I can't make you get energy when you come to work.
Yeah.
I can try to help set an environment where I can allow you to be what you're great at, but I can't make you great at something that you're not great at. And you can't work hard enough to be good at something you're lousy at. It's just not humanly possible. So the more an organization, and this is an echo of the story we're talking about, the reason our country wins more than any other country, it's more of our human beings are allowed to be themselves and have their own agency than in other places. The same thing applies with any business. It's how much of the natural talent of that human being can be connected to a customer. That is hard to do. The more, and because the more senior your title, the more you're an agent of service, because you've got to figure out how to put these elements together and keep them going. I learned that when it was this little tiny company losing money. One of my first jobs, we were going to Christmas, and one of our salesmen sold more than 2 stores did. And so he calls up in December and he says he's got a bad headache. So I get in my car with aspirin and drove it over 11 miles away to his store to get him the aspirin, because the future of the company was dependent on this guy standing in there and helping as many customers as he could, because we wouldn't have any cash at all the following day. Jeez. Well, it's like, and I couldn't make the other salespeople as good as he was, and I wasn't as good as he was. So I couldn't just jump in and stand in and fill his shoes. And that is always true for every single human being has a calling, and every single human being has a gift. Connecting it to a customer, not so easy. Even for them to know what that is not so easy.
Right. Yeah.
But that's the fundamental question.
That's great. Yeah. And it's that passion too. I mean, I find that, Brad, that, I would rather take a person who may not necessarily have the experience doing what I want them to do, but if they have an innate passion to just figure things out, and you can figure this out during interviews, I'll take that person with passion any day.
We had a
Because
measurement at Best Buy that was done through Gallup, and it there was only one measurement we ever found that was actually predictive of sales. Because all the things like you send out all the stuff that, at least for us, never worked. Like send out a survey and have people rank how much they're likely to shop with you again. All, stuff you'd assume that's going to be predictive of sales. Never any corollary we could find whatsoever, no matter how many different methods we tried. One was almost completely rock solid, was how engaged are your employees?
Yeah.
That was, you could have the store in the worst possible place and it would have a better trend line if it had highly engaged employees than a store
right.
that was in the right place. And
Yep.
I mean, it speaks to that. But now, then we had like 1,100 big stores. We had to find 1,100 people able to manage at that level, and we never were successful while I was there in terms of getting to that number, even with the measurements telling you didn't have it. That's a hard job.
Yeah, that really is. First of all, Brad, thank you again for being on our inaugural podcast.
Yes, thank you.
I think this is going to be a huge opportunity to finally give small businesses their due, and give small businesses the megaphone that they so desperately need and deserve, and that this country needs and deserves, because frankly, especially under this administration, small business has never been more under attack than in the past couple of years. And so they need this megaphone, and with folks like you and your support and for your leadership also, since day one of Job Creators Network, we're able to do that.
Well, I'm so honored to be working with you guys, because you guys are exhibit what a small business does, which is you make 5 pounds into 50 pounds, and it's exciting to be engaged with that, and the results. One of the things is, for me at this stage of life, I'm more a customer than a creator of value. And I think for us as customers, being grateful to small businesses. I've got a whole bunch of small businesses that basically keep my wife and I together. And when it's done well, that's a tremendous achievement.
Yeah, absolutely. Elaine?
Thank you again, Brad. I appreciate
Thanks.
the time and sharing your insights. We just have always loved talking to you. So I'm glad that you are our first guest on Main Street Matters. And to all of our new listeners out there, thank you so much for joining our first episode of Main Street Matters. Please subscribe to Main Street Matters wherever you get your podcasts, and we will be back soon.